Hey, Robyn.
Hi, how are you, Mark?
Good, good. Welcome to the Mindset Factory. This is where we build mindsets.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Let's see if we can construct part of my mind today.
The reconstruction of
Yes.
Robyn's mindset. Yeah,
Yes, I feel
great.
like it's a little deconstructed lately.
Yes, yeah. So, all right. So what did we say we were going to talk about today?
Well, I think we were going to talk about a couple of things. I almost wanted to say role modeling, but I know that was a discussion where we wanted to talk about how role modeling is not role play.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the opportunities where we can insert role play into learning and development strategies.
Love it. Yeah. So role play. So yesterday we had an experience. Both of us were at Corporate Advisory Council, the CAC event for the Bloomsburg MSIT program. So shout out to you. But it also kicked us into a kind of thinking mode around role playing, and we can tie some things into that conversation. But it really, I think, highlighted for me as we were thinking about this experience that we were watching the students kind of build a solution for, right? Mm-hmm. And it brought to mind this idea of role playing. And I kind of thought about kind of three areas of role playing I think would be interesting. I think we talk about role playing a lot. And I think to your point, like sometimes we conflate it with role modeling. Mm-hmm. But there's also like this sense of like, oh, well, you're talking about role playing. Like I have to be an actor and like I'm going to have to take on like this role and I'm not good at that. So I think fear comes to mind when people think about role playing.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, because it makes you vulnerable.
Oh, yeah. Right? It's like, oh, I got to be somebody I'm not.
Yeah.
Right? And,
Yeah.
But I think the conversation, if we kind of move that to, okay, that is a reality. People do have those emotional responses when we say, hey, we're going to role play. What if we look at role playing from a couple different perspectives? One of those perspectives is self-role play. And so I'll kind of lay these out and then we can just dive in. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So self-role play, where it's like you play you, but you play like an exaggerated you, which I almost can't imagine.
I know. I'm in my head going, aren't I already exaggerated enough? I don't think we need me to go up a notch. It's like going to 11 on the dial.
Right, Robyn, 11. But, yeah, and so we'll come back and talk about that because I think that's really awesome to talk about that. Mm-hmm. And then this idea of like micro role playing. You're an expert in micro learning, so I think this gives us a nice tie into like how role play maybe plays into micro learning. And micro learning is kind of like the kind of moments where we can alleviate people's stress about role playing because we're just asking for them maybe to take another perspective or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
You're setting safe boundaries to that vulnerability.
Yeah, kind of taking away some things like that we know gets in their way. And then this last piece is instructor role play, where the instructor plays a different role, and you've done this before for events we've had here. Mm-hmm. So those three things give us a nice, I think, way of talking about role play in a way maybe it's unique that we don't often talk about in the L&D and experience space. So.
Okay, so the one thing I want to add, because I think people, and this is where my head goes every time I think about instructor, even though I've done that.
Oh, yeah.
I think about managers. Even though managers aren't instructors, they're leading, right? And so I think in some sense they represent a little bit of instruction.
Yep.
And so where can role play because maybe it's a manager wanting to role play something to an employee, or it might be part of a leadership program to develop your leaders, that type of thing. So just curious about that too, and maybe we can weave in a little bit of that ideology because leadership skills are a big piece of 2025 based off of data and research from the Association for Talent Development. They're saying that those internal organization leadership journeys are becoming more pivotal. Yeah. So if that's a real big piece for people in the future to build pathways for people to stay and retain talent, how could a role play within there be something? And maybe we can tie that in a little bit too.
Love it. So, let's start there because I think, would that be just kind of interesting your thought? If we think about instructor role play, manager playing role of instructor, thus manager playing a role play role, right? So the manager walking into more of an instructor role. Do you think that's where this aligns?
And that's what I keep wondering.
Yeah.
Like, could a manager come in and be like we were talking about antis, are they the anti-manager? Every worst thing you could imagine. Or the things that really, if you have sentiment surveys at your organization, my manager doesn't support me in this way, and we see that as a common theme throughout the organization. Could that be role played out? Because to your point about perspective, maybe they need to observe it. Could it be also the self role play? Yes. Play this out, right? So maybe it's role play in a couple different ways. So, but that opportunity to see the self and how they manage, and then to see themselves managing in a way that they don't believe they are, but maybe they really start to realize, oh, maybe I do that perspectival piece that you were talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So now we have this kind of 3-tiered model that what we're really saying is it's not, you don't necessarily play one of those roles solely. You can actually blend this kind of model into, I'm the leader by taking on the instructor role, but in this moment I'm going to play myself, but an exaggerated self. And you know what? It just could be a micro moment. So there we go. We have blended all the things together. But I do think that helps clarify kind of the ways that we could roll out almost said role playing, but micro learning into role playing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So let's dive into some examples.
Okay.
So I'm curious to know if in your work you've had opportunities to do role playing or lead role playing that maybe fits to one of these models, where it's either self or micro, or looking at that like instructor, where you played a different role as an instructor.
I would say different role. I mean, I'm in my head going, have I ever played out anything for somebody as a teachable moment? And I'm struggling with thinking, did I play one out? The only one I'm really gravitating to right now is where I got to be completely somebody different, which was this challenge guide. And I see you lighting up as much as because it was so much fun to come out and create an element of surprise for the people in the workshop. But also it took me out of my own, and we talked about this afterwards, it took me out of my own comfort zone, because part of being in that role play was I wasn't allowed to answer their questions. I had to prompt them back. And what a different moment that was, because one, it made me more agile on my feet, especially to coach and encourage, which I take back now and I use for different things. So I think that there's opportunity when you get to completely remove yourself from you and do something else. So the challenge guide in the moment, but the other thing was it was hard because of how people reacted to me. They did not like that I wasn't giving them the answer. I was providing them almost ambiguity. But, that ambiguity was to tell them something about themselves and how they needed to operate or function in that moment. So that's what I was thinking about, was the affordance of the opportunity of what it taught me, but then the challenges within doing it and being comfortable with doing it and having that reality in front of you.
Yeah, and maybe there's even a point where you never become comfortable.
True.
Right? I mean, so maybe you didn't really settle into it, but you went through that role. Because I'm just thinking, you pointed out, like, I wasn't able to answer the questions. That's not Robyn.
No.
Right? So Robyn wants to answer your questions. But in the role, for those listening, it was a professional development opportunity where it was very gamified. And kind of had this like exploration safari thing going on, where the group of people were coming in and kind of walking through building a game as if they were kind of going on safari to uncover things. And you played like this guide.
Yes.
Right? But you said one of the rules was, I'm not really here to answer their questions. I'm here to kind of point them and ask the questions back, reflect them back.
Yes.
Not Robyn.
No. Not me at all.
No. But that bit of planning, like that little bit of conversation we had, paid dividends, I think, in value. How did you see that? Like, it didn't take us a lot of time to think about that role, but it played dividends going forward. What were your thoughts on how it really impacted them?
It got them to talk to each other more. Right? Because I was no longer the source of information, which sometimes we can lean on people at work to be the sole source, like an authority figure, your manager. And so it was breaking down communication, like, well, I've never done this before with you. Or you could hear the banter back and forth and the observation of the one team. Oh, they're asking, wait, listen, they're asking her this question. Let's see how she answers. Oh, she didn't answer it. Oh. So then they both went off into the, you know what I mean? It was kind of funny, because then they started to share across. When I wouldn't answer something. So one observed, like, oh, maybe we'll figure this out by, sneaking and listening, and realizing they're getting nowhere either. So then they start talking about, well, I would do it this way. Well, I would do it this way. And so and then that team over here starts observing them, which was kind of funny, but cool, because then they started talking across. Even though they were on independent journeys, doing their own things, they started to talk to one another in a collaborative way, both in independent teams and then collectively, which in the end, that was part of the professional development, was to get them to talk in that way. So those were the things I was really entertained by, even though for their initial frustration, it got them to engage with each other a little bit more and to share their ideas, and they weren't uncomfortable. And I think that's the key. They weren't afraid to share their ideas, because I was not the authority anymore. So somebody needed to trust somebody to decide, right? And they either had to say, I'm going to go with Mark's choice or Robyn's choice, or we're going to figure something out between the two of us.
Right. Yeah. And you were in costume.
Yeah.
So I don't think that a lot of the role play, I think in some ways, when you see really good role play, it's easy to get into this idea that, you have to be an actor, you have to dress up, you have to, okay, so we did do that for this event, but also recognizing it was 2 days, and we really wanted to create something special. For people in the field, like managers, for instance, I think it's a great topic. It's like, you don't necessarily need to have a closet full of costumes to role play. If you do, bravo, please, show us that. So role play doesn't have to be like staged. It can be just a little bit of planning, and you can have an incredible role play moment. Give you an example and see if this is playing me, but playing like an exaggerated me. So we were leading a workshop one time where we were talking about personality types. And what we had was individuals who knew, based on a specific assessment, they knew their personality types. And so we've done this with various different organizations. And one of the things that's really is an awesome role play is you have the person like overplay their role. And so, for instance, I'm a storyteller. Like I know I'm a high I, like if you're doing DISC assessment. And so for me, like the interaction was literally for me to like overplay the storytelling.
Okay.
And
trying to imagine this.
Right, which is hard because I'm already like
right.
But for people who maybe just discovered that they're a high I, or maybe like for instance, I think the high D, more of that kind of like more demanding kind of personality, more like I'm on a clock kind of thing. That kind of person, like. People can really watch them overplay their role.
Oh, yeah.
Right? In conversations, it's kind of like the lack of eye contact. Like you could be having a conversation with me and I'm kind of like, hey, come on. Like you got to hurry up. Right? So that's kind of overplaying a role. But interestingly enough, that was a really powerful moment where people started to explore their own personalities and how others would see it and how others would respond to it, right? By kind of overplaying. So I think on a daily basis, people, I have to watch my high I, right? I have to because I think, wait a minute, am I overplaying my tendency to want to tell stories and connect with people? But
I'm a super relatable.
Super relatable. Yeah.
I will try to relate with people a lot. Like I will share stories as well.
Yeah.
But because I want people to know that they can be comfortable with me and I can identify with them, or I'm willing to listen to them. So I will try to super relate, and not in a disingenuous way. I truly care enough, but I also know that sometimes I can go overboard with it.
Yeah.
And some people, you got to take a cue from a person about that as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, if I would role play, I'd probably try to super over relate on top of my super over relate.
So let's do that right now.
I'm trying to super over relate with you right now, Mark, didn't you know?
Yeah, so let's do that right now. It's like, as if we've never met. And I would say let's say like, here's a great example of how this plays out in daily work. Like we're doing a Zoom meeting and that 10 minutes of awkward time in the beginning of a Zoom meeting. So let's imagine we're doing that and you're the super relatable and you're overplaying your role.
Right.
And literally I'm saying, hey, Robyn, it's nice to meet you. And then I say something like, oh yeah, I had a good weekend, man. I'm a race car driver, so
I'd be like, oh my gosh, I love the speed of cars. Tell me more about your race car driving.
Oh,
this is fascinating.
It was wonderful. And my wife, like, she brings along her knitting and
oh my gosh, I crochet. I tried to knit, but I've tried knitting and I can't do it.
Oh my
they
gosh.
always tell you need to learn how to knit first and then crochet, and I didn't do it.
Wow, well, because we had our alpaca with us.
Oh my gosh.
We brought them along in the trailer.
What?
Yeah, we had the trailer with the alpaca, and she's knitting away there. We feed them only organic vegetables, and so...
I grow an organic
garden. No way!
Yeah, I do. What's sad is other than the alpaca, this is probably true.
Well, the point is, I think that's fun is those are those moments where, overplaying that role for you means like anything that somebody says, I'm just going to be like, oh my gosh, I know about that. And in this case, you're pointing out something that can be kind of humorous and as well as can be really incredibly beneficial to make those connections. But also as a person, you're saying, hey, playing that out, I had to be careful.
Right, because everything you're saying, I was like, because I wanted to ask if your wife had a loom. Did she like, take the alpaca and make her a wool? Like, because I'm sitting in my head thinking of all these things where it's like I'm fascinated by everything you're saying.
Yeah,
and but that's my genuine interest in a person.
Yeah,
and I realize sometimes that one, it could maybe come off disingenuous, and two, that's not always the task at hand is to relate that to that level with the person.
Right, because I'm thinking, well, we're like 15 minutes into the Zoom session.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Robyn's just still connecting and connecting and connecting. Yeah. So okay, so let's talk a little bit about. So we had this idea of like playing more than yourself, which is an option. I think there's some strategic ways that we have talked a little bit about doing that. Like for instance, to really look at personality types and the way that you interact with others, so you can overplay your role, so others can see, the good and the kind of struggle points that overplaying yourself, like your role, can create. So you have that appreciation of relationship. I think a lot of people think about role playing as like playing somebody else, right?
Yes, yes.
So, and I think a lot of people do talk about that. So I thought today we wouldn't necessarily, like, we can acknowledge that playing somebody else is great. And I think where we acknowledge that is in this idea of these micro role playing moments. Right? What are they? So to give everybody some background, we both have studied and are certified in systems thinking, which is perspective taking.
Yes.
Is the relationship between micro learning and role playing and perspective taking from your lens? Like, is that something we need to talk about? Is there a benefit?
Yes. There's a couple of reasons. So if we just look at microlearning as a term and a word, there's perspective that we can talk about. We're just going to acknowledge there's different ways in which the term microlearning is used.
Yes.
Where I think microlearning has its biggest benefits here is in helping to create moments of perspective, one of which is microlearning has a perspective of it can only be digital. And I am very fully a person that believes microlearning can be, one of the examples I like to give is about a poster board post-pandemic, and it showed 3 bracelets on a wrist. That was it, and it was telling you how to engage with people.
Right.
But that poster board was also on a PowerPoint slide. That image was also in your welcome piece. So there were microlearning moments because they wanted a behavior. They didn't want a behavior change. They wanted to teach people the behavior of that learning experience.
Right.
And so they utilized microlearning, whether they realized it or not. That's what they did. And much like what we're talking about with perspective and role play, we can do the same thing. We can have these moments where it's, let's say, to a manager, today, we just want you to walk in and be the person that doesn't answer their questions. Try not to participate in the teamwork of collaboration right now, right? Like something like that. Another thing that I was thinking as we were talking is how do we use microlearning in role play to emphasize the organization's culture, because culture is such a big thing now with organizations. How do we have that being demonstrated? How do we play that out? Think about new hire onboarding. How do we put that flat into an e-learning thing, or do we bring that to life through demonstration of role play? So that's and that's a perspective, right? Because maybe you came from a different organization or maybe a different department, and the culture shifts just a little bit because you've moved from one department to another inside an organization. What does that look like for you? And how do I embody the culture in the job role that I'm about to take on? What's my perspective I should be thinking about?
Yeah. So I love that idea of like doing something as simple as working as a team and saying, hey, I want you to role play where the role is actually subtractive.
Yeah.
Right? So you said something, I hadn't even thought about that. It's like, hey, your norm is to do X. And I'm going to have you role play a different role today. I want you to role play where instead of engaging or asking questions or furthering the conversation, I want you to play the opposite. And so a different role for yourself. So subtracting aspects of yourself. Right, that's really fascinating.
Right, instead of being the super self, you're doing two. You're kind of being instructor, but self as well, because you're being the anti-you.
Yes. Yeah.
So and I think that I think about what I told you. It helped me a lot to go back and talk to clients after being that challenge guide. For that activity, I was like, there's opportunity for me to sit back and listen more. And let people tell me more things, or to just inspire dialogue between those that really, because once I leave as the consultant, I need to know that you're empowered to do.
Right.
And so as a manager, you want to empower your team to do. So
Right.
understanding, because you may go through that practice. Now with things like microlearning, an important piece would not only be to play out that part, but to have something that supports evaluation or assessment. And we're not talking
Right.
A, B, C, D, true, false.
Yes.
We're talking some type of self-reflection, observation, some things that maybe might help them create a pathway for some performance development, enhancement. I'm not going to say improvement. We don't always have to improve. We can refine and enhance.
Yeah.
And so my experience helped me refine. So I think that that could be the same for a manager or a leader. And so that's what I'm saying when I say we not only need that microlearning moment, but that moment must be designed also as something that helps the person that experienced it, for whatever measure it might be. So
Yeah.
that might be something developmental, something towards a larger organizational goal, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Because they need that moment to realize, boy, I did a whole day of that, and that was easy. That was hard. I didn't know that because the other thing is you might start observing the people. I really never noticed that Bob and Linda, if I kind of don't talk, Bob and Linda actually get along better than I thought they did.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Or they're more agreeable. They
Yeah.
always seem like they're in disagreement.
Bob and Linda hate me.
Right. Oh, no. If I just get out of the way, Bob and Linda would be okay. But there's things that you can observe more when you take a different seat and do that anti-role playing, you know.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And I think so you brought up this idea of in organizations where we invest in learning, and even if you create a moment of either micro or role playing, and whatever we build, we're investing in it.
Yes.
Right? The intent is that it shifts behaviors.
100%.
Right, and so it is these moments where within organizations we do need to have to pay attention to, if you're creating these moments, how are you reflecting? And so I'm kind of just repeating back what you said,
Yeah.
Robyn, but reflecting, say how do we measure, how do we reflect, and how do we really assess what happened here today?
Right. What was even the intent in the first place to have you role play?
Yes.
We have to work backwards from that, right?
good point.
And it doesn't have to be this large strategic initiative.
You're right.
It could be something that you just want to pilot and try out. Like, how do we, I don't know if I said it in here or if it was our conversation previous, but if you have these sentiment surveys where we're hearing and seeing certain things, maybe we're trying to change the measure on the sentiment survey. And so you look at one facet. And if it's manager support, then we take this opportunity and maybe we pilot and try these role plays to see, one, can we identify what they're struggling with? And from that data, could we then see how we develop other programming that would support? What if we start to see a theme across all managers?
Right,
That
right.
they actually are intruding a little too much into the team and not allowing the team to be a team.
Love it,
So, so then we
Yes.
can develop more supporting educational pieces, but we didn't take a large lift to design this piece at all.
No.
And that's the really cool thing.
Yeah, because I even think about moving into groups that think about their customers, right? So how do we ensure that we really know our customers?
Oh, yeah.
Right. So I'm thinking just in a 2-minute conversation, which could take place in what would maybe be a normal meeting or session that people have. It could be okay, we do a bit of planning. So it's just okay, when we have this session next week, we're going to do a little bit of role playing, and you work with one person and say, look, in this, we're going to do literally a 2-minute, let's call it a support call. And you're going to play one of our customers, right? How much we can discover about what we know about customers can come out in literally 2 minutes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And a really big space for that, I think, not that not any organization couldn't find value from it that has a consumer base, but software as a service is a big place where this could be perfect. Because sometimes, we engineer, not we, but the people that create the solution of software can engineer something. And this is not a slag on engineers, but sometimes even us as instructional designers and learning developers, we can over-engineer things. And we forget.
What?
I know. It's hard to believe we could ever over-engineer something.
Okay,
But we then forget about the person because we get so fixated on the solution that's going to make things amazing.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Right. It's your baby kind of thing. But what we begin, so the reason why I'm bringing that up is I think role play allows us to see those small moments where we didn't hit the mark for the consumer, and that we haven't given them the full experience they need. We gave them a great solution, but maybe we didn't give them the tools to implement that solution, or the learning curve is hard, or whatever it might be in between. So sometimes we come in with blinders on because we maybe analytically looked at a problem and tried to solve it that way and forgot this human context.
Yes.
And so the role play, I think, here is also fantastic for just that, human context.
Yeah, love it. So let's move into this idea of instructor role play. And so tying this back to the first story we just shared about being at CAC, at Bloomsburg University, and I thought the RFP was this incredibly challenging situation, right? And not to get into the details of it, but basically you're trying to change the behaviors of vacationers in like a state park or like a natural setting. Because we all know, because I actually did a little bit of research to find out, like, how big of a problem is this? Right?
I did too.
Right? Yeah. And so I was looking at, I'm interested. I tried to find out how many arrests take place in national parks, and there's not clear data on that, which is interesting.
The sad part was about the animals.
Yeah.
That was. I don't know if you saw the same data I did, but I was just so distraught by what I was reading.
Yeah. Right. And so we have. You have wildlife that are impacted. You have natural environments that are being impacted. You have other visitors that are being impacted, and then you have the whole situation of like facilities that are being impacted, right? With graffiti or misuse or mistreatment of facilities, and it goes on and on and on. There's like a whole host of those, and of course, as we all know, as facilities degrade, people lose interest in being there, and so then there's less support for the national parks, and then there's less money to help take care of the wildlife and the fauna, right? I mean, it's just flora, fauna. So it's a really complex situation that all of us who are visiting, that we should have good manners and we should respect and we should be able to enjoy and take part in the awe-inspiring wildlife that we're looking at or environment anyway. But the point is that how do you change behaviors of all of us going there?
Right. Right. And that and I don't know about you, but I actually do camp. And I do hike, and I do go to a lot of national parks for those reasons, and a lot of state parks as well. And so I thought, boy, that's interesting because it is frustrating. You come to a campsite that's filthy.
Yeah.
And so where are your what is your behavior and mannerisms? Why why doesn't Smokey the Bear and and all those characters cut it? And how does role play maybe play a part that could make a maybe more effective message than, something a little more static, or as I was calling it, 2D. Even because I call it flat because we're not engaging with it. Role play is 3D. We're engaging. It's live. And so how do we create a different ecosystem of learning within that ecosystem of the park?
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting, because I don't know, like, when was the last time I saw a commercial for Yogi Bear?
I haven't. So there's Smokey the Bear and then there's Yogi the Bear.
Oh, yeah, wait a minute. I said it wrong. Smokey Bear. Smokey. Is it Smokey the Bear or is it Smokey Bear?
Is it Smokey Bear or Smokey the Bear? That's a great question. We'll have to look that one up.
Yeah, I think it's Yogi Bear and Smokey Bear.
I think it might be right, and I'm just dying it.
Yeah, I think so. But anyway, so when was the last time I saw a commercial for Smokey Bear? And I'm thinking, I don't know if I have recently, but I remember them from my childhood.
I do too.
Right? And so, interestingly enough, we kind of, this is another podcast, but like we have those behavioral changes that were being impacted by mass marketing that we have not had, as far as I know, unless there are commercials that are featuring Smokey Bear. But I don't think so. And so potentially it's like, so has the problem gotten worse, right? And so over time, if we don't have those mass communications where Smokey Bear is kind of, he's playing a role and he's a character and he's really putting that message out there. I don't know, it's kind of a segue, but.
Well, it's true, though, because we're talking about what influenced us in our behaviors, and there's memorable things, right? Yeah. And so if we look at, let's go back to the role play piece. I guarantee you part of the experience when I was the instructor, that was a memorable moment that the company went back and said, about the challenge guide. They could remember things more. But I'm hoping they remembered more than me. I'm hoping they remembered lots more about the experience they had or what they learned from that experience. Yes. Much like we were being taught as children that this bear is telling us, don't do this because it could start a forest fire. What's the other one? Give a hoot, don't pollute. See, we can say them all, right?
Yep.
But What's doing that now? Like for us, when we grew up, all we needed was this nationally, publicly broadcasted learning and awareness program with the more solidarity of things, because we're more, we're utilizing technology a little bit more, so we can do things a lot more independently.
Right.
I can go off and explore in a park geocaching, right? And I can do that and feel okay, and somebody might find me if I fall down because, I got a locator on my phone. But so there's... I think the tuning in is a little different, and we've got to meet the person where they're at. So if we look at role play is memorable. And I think you had talked about, you were mentioning, and I said to you, this is memorable, the mime from SeaWorld.
Yes, yes.
So why don't you talk about the mime from SeaWorld a little bit? And I think that'll help us gel that together.
Yeah, so it hadn't really occurred to me that there was a connection until yesterday when I started thinking about this attempt to transform people's behavior in a vacation setting. I mean, talk about difficult, right? Because it's like, I think sometimes in vacations, we've been, quote, behaving for a long time, and then we take vacation to not have to behave.
Right. Indulge, splurge.
Yes, right? So call it what you will. There's that moment of like, oh, I'm tired of rules. I'm tired of having to behave. I'm tired of being like always in line. I want a vacation. I just kind of want to be me and do things that I wouldn't normally do. And so here you are taking part in like a natural environment. Maybe you've spent your last 6 months in an office. You got the family out in the wild. And
they start acting feral.
Yes, exactly. It's like, my word, dude. Like, the kids even like could do that, right? So yeah, and think about the moment, like you're trying to change that behavior, but the reality is kind of like, well, you're not trying to take the vacation out of vacation.
No.
You're trying to add, right? I think you're not taking anything away. You're trying to add a different perspective. You're trying to add new behaviors so that, in essence, we're teaching people how to enjoy that vacation moment while still having all the fun and all the connection and all the like experiences they want to have, without like ruining it, right? Without destructive forces.
Or ruining it for others.
Ruining for others, yeah.
Right? Which is what you were talking about with the mime, some of that imitation.
Sorry. Yeah, so getting back to the mime. Because I want to get back to that ruining it for others, because I think, I'm pulling out the pen, for others, because I do want to talk about that. Yes, podcasters, we do occasionally tend to take notes to remind ourselves, what to talk about. So the mime is a fascinating. If anybody just go to YouTube and type in mime SeaWorld, and this mime like walks in front of the big tank in like one of the stadium areas where there's going to be a lot of people coming in the front and then moving into their seats to watch the show, and this mime, he kind of like comes in behind people, and what's fascinating about him is he's exemplifying behaviors or physical traits, or the fact that maybe they're carrying this massive backpack. I think that's one of the later ones I saw where, he literally said he was miming to the woman who was carrying this backpack, I'll carry it for you. I'll carry it for you. So she's like, she hands him his backpack, which is hilarious. She hands him this big backpack and he puts it on and is like, oh, right. And he's like, this is really super heavy. And then he kind of walks with her a bit and kind of shows her up, to where she's going to be seating, because then he turns around and walks away with her backpack. and so it made me think about, but what's really happening here? And I think as a L&D person, like putting the L&D and the experience lens on, like, I don't know, it's hard to take it off.
Right. It's always there.
It's always there. So my lens is like, what is he really teaching in all these interactions that he has with people? And first, I think foremost, he's creating a more engaging moment in just coming into your seats than would normally just be walking in.
He's a hype person.
He's a little bit of a hype guy, right?
Yeah.
So then the other thing he's doing is he's pointing out things that could lead to disrupting others.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So you got that big backpack on. I mean, you could easily go up and you could place the backpack on a seat and kind of, because he's acknowledging that's like, whoa, like, this is huge, right? So he's not telling that person, hey, by the way, make sure when you carry that up the seats, if it gets crowded, like, don't take up 2 seats with your backpack, like, put it under your seat.
Or put it in the aisle.
Yeah.
Because that's another place they'll put it to keep it out of the way.
Keep it out of the way. So he's acknowledging, like, something and drawing their attention to something. So they now have an awareness of something that they may not have had before they came in. And so does that change their behavior? My sense about us as humans is it does. It makes us aware of something in a new way, even though it may not be telling me, hey, don't do this, don't do that. It just kind of brings an awareness. So anyway, so I'm fascinated by that, which then made me think about the challenge of educating, changing people's behaviors at parks. And it made me think of role playing because I knew we were going to talk about this today. And is there something we could do? I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Is this something to do, like maybe from your experiences in the safari, guide, what could we do to role play at the parks that would be similar, kind of a merger of the mime and a merger of like the exemplifying behaviors that we shouldn't do? I don't know if you're put on your creative hat and maybe let's walk through this a little bit.
Well, there's a couple because I think about like common areas because one of the things I know, to your point, like the bathrooms usually in a national park, they're like so gross.
Yeah.
And, depending on, you have people that are there for the day just hiking, then you have people that are staying, usually camping out.
Yep.
And so that's a shared space that's common. And you see people like not cleaning up after themselves or, there's just a mess everywhere. And so how do you get them to tidy up? So one of the things I was thinking about is you could totally have a person inside one of the bathrooms just hogging up 2 sinks.
Yeah.
And then somebody's just coming in to maybe, utilize the facilities and come out and wash your hands, but you've got the sinks all taken up because you're there, taking making a bath out of the sink and not using the showers. But you could, so there's those type of things. But there's also the common areas where maybe it's just a whole bunch of picnic tables and cooking areas set up. And some people, they come, they take over 3 picnic tables and things like that. And so then how do you allow other people to come into that space and share it with you? Yeah. So that's that I think we keep saying it's that anti-behavior that you would model out. But in this day and age, part of me wants to position and petition back like, how comfortable are people pushing against other people?
Yes.
When, you know what I mean? And so for your anti-role model, do you have to have somebody come in or role play? See, I said it because I said role model.
Yeah.
Do you need a role model to come in and be another actor to that role play and model what you want and show that it's okay to do it?
Yeah, I think, so I think one of the things that we can take from the mime situation and think about applying it to like a state national park is creating almost a mocked up environment.
Yeah.
Right. Where literally, so I was kind of playing this out in my mind, like what would MYNDDSET do if that was the challenge that came to us? I think one of the things we would explore would be like at the entryways, creating kind of looking at key behaviors we want to change. And so let's take your hogging of the picnic tables kind of idea, where literally we could have a scene set up outside, which wouldn't take a lot of additional materials, but it could be one where you have a scene set up outside where there's a variety of different behaviors where this kind of mime character is acting out as people walk in, and they get to see them for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, right? It's a short duration thing, but again, it's engaging that person in, here's a greeter. So this is a greeter, and they're doing the things that you don't want them to do.
Right.
Right. I kind of imagine like this big stuffed moose, and them walking up to the moose and poking it in its eyes and getting the selfie with it.
Trying to feed it, right? And too bad you can have somebody like push up, like it attacks, because that's what's bound to happen. Like, especially like if we think here in Pennsylvania with Elk County, think about that. So sometimes people come up because they're just in awe of how, and I'm like, do you understand what's coming at you? You're too close, And if you're not familiar with seasons, it could be rut season. You could be really agitating an animal. So, we don't have the luxury of educating you on all the nuances of all these different things, but we do have the opportunity to exemplify the key, I always call things muscle movements, major muscle movements for us to be able to say, hey, these actions, they might seem familiar to you, don't do, but let's play out what's going to happen if you do that.
Yeah.
So again, I agree. Like when you're coming into the park, those opportunities when you're driving down that trail to park your vehicle, if it was near where you park, that would be a valuable point because you got to get out, you got to get set up, get your map out, get your kids out, make sure you got the water. Did I put my repellent on? You have all these things you're doing to prep yourself, but the behavior hasn't been prepped.
Yes.
And so right beside where you park could be a great opportunity opportunity to play some of these role play,
Yeah.
pieces. Now, if you wanted to extend it, you could with more micro learning by doing something like with a quick QR code where you could also have these things that were role played put into videos where they could be played again.
Yep.
You could add them to geocaching. There's other ways to implement them, but the live piece, I think, one of the things we talked about is agency.
Yeah.
Who's motivated to hit a QR code and have a whole educational experience before they feel like they're going into their
Yeah.
educational experience?
Right.
Am I not in nature? Is that not my educational experience, right?
Yes.
So it's hard to drive agency to go, I need to know this before I go do this. To your point, I just want to chill out. I'm done being anything other than this person on vacation.
Yeah, and I think that's why we can have humor be a teacher of serious subjects in this case.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely, because you're not scolding them, you're not lecturing them, you're just kind of giving them that gentle reminder, like maybe 50 feet, 100 feet back from a moose would be very smart.
Maybe good, yeah.
Or stay in the car.
Or stay in the car. Yeah. So I think, so time always goes really, really fast. And the last topic, I think, is we mentioned a little bit about the power of role play now kind of in our bipolar culture. Right.
And I want you to talk about this bipolar culture piece. I'm very interested in this.
Yeah, and so I think this is a case where it's a lot of times between two individuals or between groups, discussion topics become kind of like an either or. Like there's no space in the middle.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. We need the gray.
Yeah, we need the gray. Like most of our solutions are actually in the gray. Very few, I think, are in the absolutes. Right at the end.
But we're asked to provide absolutes.
So aren't we?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. And so. I think role play has a really important role in getting us to kind of recognize that what are we doing in role play? A lot of times what we're doing is exemplifying the us and thems, right? So So if I play the role of somebody who I typically would view as a them, right, and I now have to play this role, then I'm going to most likely exaggerate it, right? I'm going to give more absolutes than maybe what they would give. But I'm giving my interpretation of that other group or that other person's view, right?
Yeah.
If he's like, okay, play your opponent, right? Act out what the person that you're trying to kind of, quote, win the argument over, play their role for a moment.
Oh my gosh, I'm just sitting here not even needing the super relate.
Yeah.
Instant reaction is L&D deals with it all the time with stakeholders.
Yes.
Just play that one out.
Play the role of a stakeholder, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And this helps us, I believe, that the more we get used to doing it, the more we take that perspective of another person and act that out in a situation where it's safe and both parties understand that we're role playing. And we're role-playing for the experience of understanding each other's perspective, how many times does that turn into, I didn't know you thought that?
Exactly, where if you're okay to be vulnerable in that experience,
Yes.
it's safer for you to say the things you're thinking because you're not being judged for them. You're just opening up and looking at things for what it is.
Yeah.
And you're so right. A lot of times it's, I didn't think about that. I just had that experience last week because the perspective of the individual is everybody uses the ADDIE model to track hours. And my comment back to them, so it was like, well, let me give you the perspective of others that I've worked with. And here's the things I've learned. And I said they actually look at project management and business functions. So they're not just looking at ADDIE because ADDIE doesn't serve. And I said, if I look at your managers, they're not even doing work to the ADDIE model. Their tasks are to talk to stakeholders, plan out and forecast, do capacity plan. I said, those aren't sitting in, and that's when they were like, I never thought about that. What a great perspective. I've been doing this for years and I'm so here. And so sometimes it's that ability and that comfort then to counter back because most times people are I just want a solution.
Yeah.
And I think this is the solution.
Yeah.
And so getting in their shoes and role-playing them to understand why they even thought that was the solution can so help you have a totally different conversation on that whole, you don't understand, you don't get the language, you don't know what this, it's not about that. It's, don't say you don't understand. Say, help me understand you.
Yes.
I think that's, the key here with this type of role play you're talking about is to help me understand you.
Absolutely, yeah. And get in that gray space. Like, love the gray matter,
Yeah.
right? Anyway.
It's very cerebral of you.
That is, yeah. And it gets into this idea of like doing behaviors that can ruin things for other people.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, right? If I do something that then I can walk away. Like if I do something to damage an area of a national park, I walk away, and the next person comes up and doesn't have the ability to see the park or see that setting in the same way that you did, right? I think we've seen this in some of the projects we work on in terms of like with revitalization. This could be a whole other podcast, right?
Right.
Like why revitalize a town?
Oh my gosh, right? And think about how many different perspectives play out there. Those that know change is needed but doesn't know how to go about it. Those that, just wish for the days of past.
Right.
Yes. There's some and all of that always playing out. And then, this time this town's time has passed.
Correct.
So you need to role play out, well, like what if this town didn't exist anymore?
Yeah.
Just play that out. Where are you? Where are your kids? Where are your things that you rely on as convenience?
Yep.
You can play it out in a very, almost like a high-end way. That like super version of it.
Yeah.
The catastrophizing it.
Yes. Yeah. No. I think we just touched on the way that I think role play can be used in a lot of different ways. So just to kind of recap, like we talked about, overplaying yourself. These ideas of like micro moments of role play where it's kind of just perspectival taking of other people's perspective and kind of playing those out. And then this idea of like an instructor playing a different role. And that instructor, as you pointed out very, very well, can be a manager, could be a leader, could be a coworker, right, in that moment of assuming an instructor role.
I also think, though, we talked about that even though there is a bipolar culture, what we need to welcome and put out there for role play is the gray, because the gray is not so polar, right? It's more, it's gentle, it's kinder, it's more to the middle, which is where we need things to go if we want to create really great experiences for everybody. Because when you're doing this, you're only serving a very finite group if you're on one end or the other, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we serve that middle piece? So I like that we're not acting. We're allowing a safe space for being vulnerable to share a perspective, and we're trying to serve more people by doing the role plays because we're not sitting in these polar opposite elements.
Love it. That's in there. That's great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I hope I related well.
You did. You did. Thanks, Robyn.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mark.